Hey everyone, happy Friday, or for those of you who are joining us on replay. My name is Janae Johnson, and I'm so glad that you are back. For those of you who are rejoining us, who are back with us again for another installment of the Now of Work. So, if you've been with us before, and if you are someone who has been following us, you know that we talk about all things related to all the different trends that are happening in the workplace and how what we've heard about the future of work is actually happening now. So I'm super excited for this topic. We have an amazing guest today, and I can't wait to talk with her. And so I first just want to ask if you are joining us live or if you are joining us in the replay, tell us where you're joining us from. Like, put it in the chat. Now, I am starting to monitor this on my phone because I noticed that sometimes I can't really see your comments in the chat when we're broadcasting, but I would love to know where you're actually joining us from. So, are you in Houston? Are you in the Bay Area? Are you somewhere on the other side of the world? I would love for you to just put it in chat. So, as those comments come in, I'm going to start by introducing our speaker. And I'm also just going to give you all some context around how we got here to the Now of Work. So, our company, CTM Unlimited, we do a lot of work around workplace culture. And we are on a mission to create legendary workplaces. That is our mission. That is our goal. That is what our team is focused on. And so, with that, we are looking at how the trends in the workplace and what our leaders are saying is some of the things that we're talking about in this series. Some of those trends and some of the challenges that leaders are having is because things are rapidly changing. And so, what I love is that today we have someone coming on who is very familiar with change and how to manage it. And so, I'm going to go ahead and read a bit of her bio and then we're going to bring her up. But I am thrilled as you all are in the comments. Hold on, hold on. I see people. Oh, wait, we got people from Houston. Oh, hey, Amanda from Salt Lake City. Okay, Conroe. Hey, from ATL. Hey, Dr. Tanya. So somebody said hot ass Houston. Yes, yes, it is stupid hot right now. I see a couple of other people. Yeah, yeah, that was Brian that said hot ass Houston. I see Haley is joining us also from Houston. Yes, I love this topic too. So before I introduce our speaker, I want to make sure I shout out all the people who are returning people to our broadcast, and also for all the new folks, welcome. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you took time out of your Friday. Now, the running joke is I know a lot of corporate people are either like flat out not working on Friday or fake working on Friday. So, whatever your situation is, you don't have to say. But I'm glad that you took time out this Friday afternoon to join us. And for those of you who couldn't catch us live and you're watching the replay, welcome, welcome, welcome. So thank you for those of you. Hey, David, Spring, Texas. Thank you for those of you who are joining us live. So without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce our speaker and our co-host for today. I'm excited to have a really great in-depth conversation with her. Sabat Khawaja is an organizational change strategist with 18 years of experience driving large-scale transformational change across operational and functional areas of her clients' businesses. She specializes in innovative corporate storytelling, crafting dynamic strategies, and persuasive value propositions that inspire people to embrace change. The backstory is I met Sabat maybe, I don't know how many years ago. I'm not going to date us, but the two of us were on similar parallel paths and we didn't even know it. So we worked on a couple of consulting projects together years ago, and then we just stayed connected on LinkedIn. But over the years, we both have noticed how we have similar voices, we have similar passions. And so when this topic came up and my team said, okay, well, who's going to be the person? I was like, I already know, I got it. It's Sabat. So without further ado, I would love to bring Sabat up to the stage, producer. Sabat, welcome, welcome, welcome to our broadcast. Thank you for being here. And I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about your background, because the bio I read about it's just, it's general, it's great. People can kind of figure that out from looking at you on LinkedIn. Well, tell me more about who you are in this world and also why this topic is so important to you. We'd love to hear that.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. I have to just start by saying I've just been such an admirer of your work, kind of from afar. And it's so nice. I'm so glad that our paths have intersected again. So thank you so much for having me. And I'm just so appreciative of the important work and your voice and everything that you do at CTM. So just, yeah, a little bit about more about myself. I kind of fell in love with change management early on in my career. Started my career at Accenture, spent about 10 years there, and just kind of, continued to work in the area of change management. And I guess about 6 years ago, my approach to change really, I started to think about change differently. And I was exposed to different types of clients that I'd never had the opportunity to work with at Accenture. And so started working with a lot of tech clients. And that world of tech introduced me to UX design, visual design. And so there was this sort of collision that happened between change management and design thinking and visual design. And we've come up with our own approach to change called Change by Design. And so hopefully we'll be able to get more into that as we speak, but that's what I'm passionate about. And that's what we specialize in at Provectus.
Yes. So tell me a bit more about Provectus. Like, did you wake up one day and say, I'm going to have a company and it's going to be great? And then voila, you just had a company and you're doing all this impactful work in the world across the corporate landscape? Or what's the real story? Because I'm guessing that's not the story, but tell me what's the story behind the company?
Yeah, that's definitely not the story. So it was really organic the way that it was that it built. I mean, I think I got to a point in my career where I was traveling twice a week, and I started to have children. Actually, Provectus, the age of Provectus coincides pretty closely with my eldest daughter, who's now 8. And I just kind of made a decision, like I don't want to do this. Like I need to be present for my family, and I can't do this. And it's definitely a good life for other people, but it wasn't working for me or my family. And so a group of us kind of decided to leave our positions in the world of Big Four and just started off as a collective. And so it was just us kind of sharing clients and working together. But I think what really changed everything was Change by Design. We, a lot of our early clients were technology clients, and we started to really think, I mean, it was a smart group of people to begin with, but I think we started to see change management very differently, working within, UX design, visual design. And we just felt like, hey, when your job is to influence people, you need to have an element of marketing and of design. And so Provectus is a really collaborative, multidisciplinary place where we bring people together with very different backgrounds, both kind of racially and ethnically, but also in terms of like intellectually and how we think and how we're trained. And I think that's what clients have really, picked up on, and that's really fueled our growth. So it went from a small collective to now, 30, 40 people in the network.
I love it. I love it. So before I ask you my next question, I have to do what we always do for the Now of Work. We bribe people. We bribe them to get involved. Now, most of the time, the topics are juicy enough that people want to get involved anyway. But my latest bribe is we have been giving away a copy of, yes, bribing time. We've been giving away a copy of the best-selling book that I co-authored with Lisa Nichols called Rise Up. And shout out to Ingrid Robinson she was our last winner the last time we did this. So we give out a copy of the book to the person who is most engaged, who asks really good questions, or who has like great comments, or really stays involved. And the trick is you got to be on for the whole broadcast. So we check in at the very end to see if you're still with us. And that's how we select our winners. So again, if you are joining us live, hey, even some of the replay people might say, you know what, it wasn't as engaging as I wanted it to be live, so I'm going to add my own engagement while I'm watching. You are still eligible to actually win this free prize of this book. So our team will send that to you. Yes, there is a catch. Thank you. There's definitely a catch. So you do have to be engaged. We want to hear your questions. We want to talk about anything that you're interested in as well. So Sabat, my question to you is, first of all, why even join me for this conversation on navigating social issues in the workplace? Like, why is it important to you? And why did you say yes to it?
Yeah, so I think it's a crucial topic. I think I read like in an HBR article recently that 89% of employees report feeling experiences of conflict at work, and there's not a lot of training around like how to navigate that. We live in increasingly kind of polarized times. It's an election year. There's a steady flow of information coming to us from all of our social media feeds, and I think that people are feeling really charged, and they bring that to work, right? That's where we spend most of our time, and that's where we're hopefully forging really deep relationships with people. And so you want to be able to express yourself or to be seen, and so how do you do that in a healthy way? Everyone always says don't talk about politics and religion, right? But we're human beings, and so these topics do come up, right? And so like how to navigate that in a way that is healthy, and that fosters a tolerant culture and a sense of psychological safety, because I think those are the keys to having a healthy workplace environment.
Yeah, and I think also what we've seen, because I agree with all of that, but what we've seen is that gone are the days where leaders can just say, that's something that has nothing to do with us, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to talk about that. And we've definitely seen it in recent years whenever there's been some kind of atrocity that happens in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and it directly impacts the team or even that broader organization. Leaders are now feeling pressure where they have to say something, or if they don't say something, there are these backroom conversations that are happening about, okay, well, why is my leadership not speaking up? So we saw that a lot, especially in 2020 and 2021. We saw it with the killing of George Floyd. And then going forward, there were all of these other things that were happening in the world, and people got accustomed to hearing from their leadership about these social issues. So we know that there's been a direct impact, which is why we wanted to talk about this. What do leaders need to do now? So I'm going to get into my questions about. You already know we're going to have a great conversation, but I also want to be checking in the comments to see who's going to be winning this prize. And so I want to first ask you, what would you say to leaders who are saying, I just want to ignore this?
Yeah,
I'd rather just ignore it. What would you say to them?
It's interesting. I think that's a great question, and it really intersects with what I tell leaders about change management in general. Like aside from this issue, it's recognize the world that we're living in today, right? It's not 20 years ago where static methodologies around change are going to be relevant to 2024, right? We're living in a world where you've got a lot of access to. I'm not going to say knowledge, right? Knowledge is behind me. It's books, right? It's to information, right? Steady stream of information. Everybody is hooked up to social media. We're on a social media platform as we speak, right? And we have to recognize that all of us have an algorithm that to some extent is shaping and manufacturing our worldview, right? And we've never lived in a time of, like that, similar to that. And so to say that this has nothing to do with me and that I'm just going to ignore it is to really to be out of touch with reality. So, as a human being, if you're looking at imagery and reading content that is going to rile you up, that's going to make you think see the world in a different lens, you're going to bring that baggage with you everywhere you go, right? Correct or not correct, right or wrong, fact or fiction, people live in these realities that are largely shaped by, their online world, right? And so I think it's remiss as a leader if you just pretend like that's not happening, and act like you can just ignore these issues that are impacting your people.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times we do have leaders who say, hey, I acknowledge that this person on my team or these people on my team are coming into work and it is impacting their productivity because of what they are consuming, because of what's happening. And not to say that just means that, tell your team to get off of social media, because if it's not social media, it's our 24-hour news cycle. It's, even if I'm not paying attention to something, I can't tell you how many times somebody will text me like, did you see? Or they'll share it with me. Like I can say I'm going to log off of everything, but people will still kind of put it in front of you because we are consuming at such a rapid pace all of this information. So there are leaders that say, like, okay, I understand that I can't just lead that way. But sometimes what I find is that they are not equipped. They don't know, okay, I acknowledge I have to do something. I don't know what that something is. And they are looking for support. Now, I'm going to back up just a little bit because I'm not going to assume that everyone in our audience knows what change management is, because I've heard you mention that a couple of times. And of course, that is at the crux of the practice in the firm that you lead. How would you explain or define change management just so we can level set for our audience?
Yeah, and I think I'll just keep it really simple. It's bringing people along on a journey of change, right? Change is the rate of change is just exponential, right? So anybody who's living and breathing in 2024 knows that there's constant change that we're dealing with, whether it's an upgrade, whether it's a technology, whether it's a regulation or a new way of working. Well, how do you manage that? So there's a discipline called change management that has proven tools and templates and methodologies of how to lead people along this journey, and it's been honed over many decades, and so it's crucial in keeping people engaged and fostering a good workplace culture, and then also to drive adoption for all of these changes. Nobody likes change. Even good change. I just moved into a new house, and it was a nice change, but I was like, oh, this is annoying, right? Like, I don't know where things are. And so any kind of change is disruptive. And the goal of change management is to really minimize that business disruption to get people adopted and embracing and sustaining change.
So with that being said, if we talk about change management, can you specifically call out like what leaders have to do differently? So let's say 10 years ago, this is what they were doing when it comes to social issues. And then currently, this is what they need to do. And we know from a change management perspective, we're always looking at what's the delta in between. But like, tell me about what kind of the future state looks like. If we say to be an effective leader in the workplace and in this world, you now have to start doing X. Like, what do they have to do differently?
Yeah, and I think it's a continuum, right? I think there's a continuum out there, and I do think one good place to look is just go look at the market. I mean, we have really good examples of leaders who have dealt with social issues in a way that's healthy. I mean, I will say my old company Accenture did a great job of that. There were many outlets for us. I consistently felt seen, and I know that other colleagues also, and felt supported. And even when topics were extremely controversial and polarized, they didn't just resort to silence. And so that's something I definitely appreciate about Accenture. But we've seen I won't name names here, but bad examples of people who did a terrible job, people who felt censored, and then got their employees kind of lashing out against that. So I think one good thing is just to let's learn from other people's mistakes, right? Like what has worked and what has not worked, and not reinvent the wheel. But I think it's really down to the same basic core foundational sort of fostering healthy dialogue and communication, which within a business context, all of that is crucial, right? Today or 20 years ago, we want to foster a tolerant culture. We want to be we want to be cognizant of our language, right? Like everyone says words matter. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean when words, what does that mean to say words matter? Right. And I think it's kind of like a thing that everyone says, but, what's at the crux of that? And for me, one of the things is just to reframe things in a way that's positive and that allows for open-ended dialogue between people. I think also just understanding conflict management. I gave that statistic about 89% of employees saying that they dealt with conflict. In that same article, it said something like only 39% of employees received training in how to handle a conflict. And many of us don't know how to do that, right? Not at work, not even in our personal lives, let alone at work. Because, there's different ways of there's different modalities and ways that people, manage conflict. Some people avoid it. Some people are a little bit more aggressive, right? And so it's like, how do you manage all of that within a workplace? And I think essentially the other piece is around people assuming that if you disagree with somebody, then that's a very negative thing. Like that's negative, and everybody needs to agree. I think we need to start to get more comfortable, and it's hard when you live in a polarized world, right? It's hard when you're only seeing content that reinforces your own worldview, but to truly be critical thinkers who are adding value to our clients and to our business and to the world, we have to be comfortable. We have to start to get comfortable with disagreements. And there's kind of scientific ways of doing that. And like number one is focusing on what's similar first, right? Like we've got this commonality, right?
Right. I'm sorry. Can you say that again? Because I think we have some avid people who are scholars who are on this call who are also paying attention. So they may want to take a note. And if you are not an avid scholar, you should be, and you should take a note. So the first thing you said was to identify what we have in common, identify what is similar about whatever that polarizing view is. Yes, go ahead. Sorry, I had to interrupt. Just take a note.
Thank you. No, it's because look, at the end of the day, and we all, this is also one of those things that everyone says, is like we're all human, right? We all feel deprivation in the same way. We all feel fear in the same way. We all have a fear of not fitting in or of getting called out, right? And so I think recognizing that common humanity, number one, but then also recognizing our shared goals. Like, hey, we might be at opposing ends of the political spectrum, but we're here to do a job. Like, this is our livelihood, and like we're on the same team here. Like, let's recognize that first. Like, I want you to be successful, and you want me to be successful. Like, nobody wants anyone to fail here, right? And I think when you have that, there's already a sense of security. But this requires really open dialogue. Which I think some leaders embrace that and they're excellent at it, and some people have a fear of it, and I guess my message is that there are resources, and books and things that you can, training that you can take to help you navigate these types of conversations.
So it sounds like we first identify what we have in common. Secondly, we anchor to common values or common goals, common objectives, right? So there are things when we talk about whether it's politics or anything that is social or socioeconomic, and there might be viewpoints on what the problem is, the root cause of the problem, who's to blame for the problem, how to fix the problem. We hear a lot of that where everyone's sort of, we live in an age where everyone's an expert, right? So everyone comes with their expertise and says, well, I think this person is to blame, or this leader is to blame, or this party is to blame, this country is to blame, whatever it is. And I also think this is what needs to be done, right? But if we say, okay, well, I agree to disagree, and we anchor to those common objectives, we're here to do a job. We have a common goal for our company, for ourselves, for our team. And we sometimes will have to agree to disagree.
Yeah.
So it sounds like that's the second step. And then the other part of it is something that you mentioned earlier, is just building capability around like, how do I really have these conversations in a way that is productive at work? Because what we don't want to do, and what we're not saying at all, is that you need to take time out from being productive at work. And don't worry about getting the work done. Just try to make sure everyone gets along and everyone agrees. And that's not what we're saying at all. But I think what you mentioned is that less than 40% of us actually have that training, even just a awareness level training of how do I resolve conflict.
Yeah.
And I also heard you mention that's not just in our work life, that's in our personal life too. Like, how do we resolve conflict in a healthy way that moves us forward? But I'd love for you to add some more there too, some more context, because we've seen this a lot in the workplace where maybe there is a lack of capability. That some leaders or individuals are saying, I want to do better in this area, but I don't really know what to do.
Yeah, and I think so. I think there's multiple avenues, right? Like we live in a day and a time of information, and so like reach out to your DEI representative. Like, do you have a DEI representative in your company? Like, is that something that you invest in? And see what training, what they can offer. Partner with other people within the company who have this background. I mean, open fostering a psychological safety and healthy communication is nothing new, right? So I think that partnering with the right people, making this a priority, because I think that's another thing. Like, if this is not a priority for people within the company, then it's sort of you're not able to build that momentum that's needed for creating that that capability. And I think essentially, like, it starts with recognizing that disagreements happen, right? But when disagreements happen, and if you manage that well, that leads to better ideas within, and we've seen that within our business context, right? Diversity of ideas. Like if you
Mhm.
have a company where you can't manage disagreement, then I would say that's a very poor indicator of how you're servicing your clients and your customers.
Yep.
Because that is at the core of any good idea. And everyone at Provectus, like we experience this all the time. There's always that tension. When there isn't any tension, then I know that we're not doing what we're supposed to do. So I think that's,
Mhm.
there are frameworks that you can look to like, how do we create this healthy tension? I think not even just from, the standpoint of what we're talking about today, but just in general, so that you do have, so it's not just the loudest voice that bubbles to the top, but it's the diversity of voices, so that way you get the best ideas.
I love
Um,
that. And I love how, you talked about how the disagreement is necessary. This is how you're going to get the best outcome, best solutions. And so we don't want to at all enforce this kind of group think, right? Where everyone is just saying, yes, yes, this is great. Yes, I agree, when they don't actually agree. And maybe their disagreement leads to a better idea, a better solution. Maybe it helps to resolve an issue or a problem. Maybe it helps to mitigate risk, but people need to feel open in the workplace and within their teams to actually say, you know what, I don't agree with that.
yep.
And I think what I've seen with even some of our clients, the leaders who already have fostered that type of environment where agreement is not viewed as like the plague of like, oh no, we can't disagree because that's like the worst thing in the world. It means that we're not functional. For leaders who have already said, no, I want you to poke holes in this. I
Yes.
want you to tell me why this will fail. I want you to tell me what I'm missing. I want you to show me what my blind spots are. Those are the leaders that actually have an easier time navigating some of those issues that are happening outside of the workplace and really being able to effectively communicate with their teams.
100%. And just kind of going back to like what we can do, I think one of the most important things is learning how to listen. And I say that goes for myself as well. I know in the world of consulting, we're always trying to like prove ourselves, and
Yep.
but active listening is so crucial. And I think those leaders who are excelling in this environment are the ones who know how to listen. And there's, like I've heard of like the listening triangle, as a technique where you have, three people, one person's talking, the other person's kind of trying to absorb everything, and then you've got a mediator, and then you talk about what was said. And so maybe there's some exercises around active listening that you do, but that is
Mm,
the crux of the breakdown and everything that we're seeing in the world, right? From in the micro, like within our own lives, within the workplace, on the political spectrum, like it's this inability to like listen to each other. And if we can master that, then I think you're going to have a great work environment.
So, Sabat, I want to switch not topics, but kind of switch directions a little bit. We've talked about leaders, we've talked about the workplace, but there is a big role that the individual, the I, plays in all of this. And so, you and I have discussed how sometimes we've had challenges where even we thought that someone was saying something that was offensive or that was, an attack, and it actually wasn't, but we had to assume that good intent and
Mhm.
figure out like, wait a minute, maybe they don't mean it that way.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm jumping to conclusions. Maybe I'm making assumptions. We have also talked about how there is this consumption of information that may or may not be accurate. So
Mhm.
let's say outside of like whatever is happening in the world of Gen AI and deep fakes, and like you see a video, you hear a voice, and it's not really that person saying it. Even beyond that, let's talk about how there's a lack of research that happens. People don't necessarily read primary sources anymore. They are consuming from whatever news platform or media platform that they like and they trust, and it may or may not be accurate. So I want to really focus on the I, but before you answer that, I see there are a couple of comments that I want to call out. So Dr. Tanya says, say no to groupthink, but that definitely takes safety. And she's right about that. So when we talk about psychological safety, people need to feel safe to say, like, I don't agree with what everyone else is saying. But if they attempt to do that and then get shot down or they get criticized or ridiculed, then likely they won't do that anymore. And then the second part, Tanya said, listening actively is key. There are listening exercises for leaders to help them remove bias. So exactly what you said, Sabat, and Dr. Tanya, I know she's an expert in this area as well. Like figuring out how to give people resources to actually listen, and also figuring out how leaders can figure this out for their team, right? How does a leader establish that psychological safety so that people feel like I can say no and not be ridiculed for it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why I made the comment, like, you have to make this a priority, right? Like, so I'm not an expert on how, bias training, for example, but
Right.
when that is a priority for you, just go. You can be resourceful. Like
Yes.
we live in times where like you can find experts to help you, but I think the
Yes.
key is making that a priority. But all of there's a plethora of resources and information out there to help people. I think the problem is that in many organizations, it's not a top priority, right? And it only maybe becomes one when you start having conflicts that lead to negative consequences for the business. So it's better to preempt that.
I heard something interesting yesterday. So I had a speaking engagement at the Gulf Coast HR Symposium here in Houston yesterday. And so I'm in a room with like a bunch of talent leaders, and we were talking about this topic of the now of work, but really focusing on what's changing and what they have to do differently in terms of talent management.
Right.
And I just asked them in general, like, what are some things that you're seeing that are changing outside of technology? So we know that technology is disruptive. We know that Gen AI is changing the workforce very rapidly, and companies and leaders are trying to figure that out. But one of the things that came up in our session yesterday, they talked about how people are unhinged. Like and she gave an example. I definitely won't say the name or the company or organization, but this woman in our session, she said, and she works in HR, she said that there was a person within the group who wanted some resolution from HR. They felt like they were being treated unfairly, something had happened to them. And I guess the process of that solution or resolution wasn't moving fast enough. And they literally picked up the phone and called someone, like called their manager and said, what do I have to do to get resolution on this? Do I need to bring a bomb to work?
Oh, wow.
Whoa, what? Like, this is what we're resorting to. So of course, then that triggers a whole nother set of issues that now, instead of getting the resolution on something that she likely had the right to feel how she felt,
Right.
now they have a whole nother situation, right? Now there are legalities involved, all of that. And so they were saying they're seeing an uptick in threats to workplace violence. They're having to do, yes, a bomb. They're having to do things like really prep people and prep leaders for what do you do if you have a disgruntled employee that comes back. So it's like people's filters are gone, and I don't know what all the causes are, but I thought that was so I don't want to say interesting. It was disheartening, right? And so when you think about what's happening in the world and how people are bringing that into the workplace, like, what are your thoughts about that? Because it wasn't like when she said that in the room, Saban, it wasn't just her. There were all these other leaders in the room. They're like, yep, we're having issues like that. Yes, we've had to, call law enforcement. We've had, we had a fight break out at our call center. Like just all kinds of weird things that you would not hear about before. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that too.
Yeah, I have some context in the airline industry, and they always talk about this too. Like, you get a lot more, disgruntled, aggressive passengers now than you have in the past. So I think that uptick is resonant across many industries. I mean, I think, look, one, the workplace can't solve like mental health. Like, if somebody's going through a mental health, it sounds like this person might be going through something a little bit more on the, a little bit more beyond just like, hey, we need conflict resolution training, if they were going to resort to that type of dialogue. But I think yes, I'm not surprised that there's an uptick, because again, it's talking about the individual, it's really, we have to educate ourselves. And I'm talking to myself as well here, that, when you are constantly bombarded, not even just on your social media, right, but just on the news, like you said, with negative news, negative sort of information, sometimes misinformation about your fellow man, then, you're going to be you're going to be charged, right? And so for some people who are maybe going through life issues, or they're stressed out, or they've got like, hormonal issues happening, that's enough to like tip them over. I know personally, I'll just be very sort of transparent with you and with the audience here. I had to like cut myself off from the news for the last couple of weeks because it was just it was just too much for me to handle. To see constant like the kind of imagery that we're seeing in the news. And so, we can't underestimate what an impact that has. And I was talking to a psychologist recently, and she talked about this thing called secondary post-traumatic stress. And, it's a real thing. You can vicariously experience that trauma that, now that all of these atrocities that we're watching, right, happen, even if they're isolated, right, that's what we're seeing. And it's happening, we're witnessing it. Like, there was a quote from one of my favorite writers. He said, anything that happens now is on camera. Like everything has been reported, right? And so we're now seeing things that we've never seen before. It's upsetting us. And, add to that other issues that you're dealing with. I'm really not surprised that you have people, reacting in a way that considered unhinged. And so, we all have to take care of our mental health and recognize what our own limitations are in this consumption, because it is a consumption. When you look at social media, I like to say, like, it's like we're dopamine zombie, because when we really have to educate ourselves on the science of what happens. You look at a new thing, it triggers a surge of dopamine in your brain, and we like that because we like to see something that is new and different, and then we do it again and we do it again, and we're screwing up our dopamine receptors, and at the same time we're consuming a lot of information, and that has an impact. And as individuals, the onus is on us to like take stock of that. How is this affecting me? And I know I had to do that with myself. I wasn't as present with my children. It was having a negative effect on me. And I'm somebody who kind of studies this for a living, right? Because this is what I talk to my clients about. Like, hey, your 20-page slide deck, not going to work because you're dealing with dopamine zombies. So you need to be interesting, and you need to take 7 seconds. But I'm a victim of the same thing. So I see Dr. Tanya. Sounds like she's got some great perspective.
Yeah, she definitely does. And she has a rich background in psychology too, because I know her. And what she said is vicarious trauma is real. And if we think about how we consumed news during the pandemic, I fully support her saying I really haven't watched the news since then.
I don't blame her.
I remember feeling like a zombie in like spring of 2020, and feeling like I don't want to watch the news, and I had never have watched the news this much in my entire life over a concentrated period of time, but I literally don't know what's happening. Right. I literally have no idea what's happening in the world. And so, being able to at least figure out, like, can I go outside? Can I not go outside? Is this store open? Is it not open? Is there a mandate here? Is there not a mandate? And then, of course, you get all this other noise that comes along with that. And then, a lot of times the reporting sources, regardless of where it is, if we're talking about US cable news, they all have agendas. I don't care what you follow, what you watch. It could be Fox, MSNBC, CNN, any of the others. There is an agenda. And so I talked about earlier this week when we were chatting, how my husband and I, during the pandemic, when they were doing all these White House briefings, we actually would channel surf, right? So they'd have the officials come up. So remember, it was Dr. Fauci and maybe President Trump at the time and whoever else giving a briefing on what was happening as it related to the pandemic, particularly in that 14 days to flatten the curve, which I'm still trying to figure out what that was about, because clearly it wasn't 14 days. But anyway, we would watch the exact same press conference, but we would watch it on 3 different news outlets. And every single one broadcasting on the exact same press conference would have a different headline in bold. Mm-hmm. And so if you only read the headlines, you wouldn't actually know what was important about that press conference. No. Just by reading the headlines. Unfortunately, I think people are still consuming information in that way. And so, and then they're coming to work. So they're watching whatever, or they're on TikTok following the same, TikTok knows your algorithm. So it's going to continue to show you the videos that you like and engage with. And then you're doing that all weekend and then showing up on Monday to work.
Yeah.
And it's having an impact.
I would say that we need to make some kind of training around this mandatory for people, like in school even, because we have to be responsible and recognize, especially now with AI, where you can imitate people and voices. We have to arm ourselves with the knowledge of like what it is that we're consuming, and really have good social media hygiene, because all of these things have an impact. Even if you're a very balanced person who's able to compartmentalize, you're still going through internal turmoil, right? And you don't have to live your life like that. And so I would say that it's crucial to understand the way that media plays into these things. It's interesting. I want to do a study one day, if I have time, but I did some travel recently, and I went to some kind of remote villages, right, in the Middle East. And it was interesting to see these people who were not, with everything that's happening in the world, zero like aggression and anger, because they're not watching social media constantly, and they view world events very differently, where it's like, oh, we're being tested, and this is a test that we have to go through, and this has happened in the world, and and they're just trying to cope with it with their religion and with their culture and with their faith. And so, and I feel like, they have the luxury to do that. And whereas me as an American, I'm a little bit more charged, right? And I recognize that that's because of my consumption of media, and which one is right and wrong, which one is closer to reality. Like, I don't know, but I can tell you, like, those people are a lot more at peace, And so I'm not saying turn off all your social media. We all need that to survive, right? All of our businesses, but take it with a grain of salt, and also recognize that having your beliefs challenged is a very healthy thing, and that's how we grow as individuals. And we should encourage that in the workplace, outside the workplace, instead of shying away from it. And there's studies done about this. People actually assume that the disagreement is going to cause a lot more consternation than it really does. You assume it's going to be terrible, like we're going to disagree, but actually, when you get into it, if you're honest and if you're listening actively, it's not that bad, and you might learn something, and that's always a good thing. So.
Listen, you gave me something for like some personal conversations that I need to have, right? Like, or sometimes we want to avoid conflict because we're like, oh, this is just going to drain my energy, and I already know it's going to end badly. And I think a lot of times we project that into the situation where it's not necessarily the case.
No.
So, Sabad, you mentioned that you really, when you started your business, it was because you wanted to be more present for your children.
Yes.
And so, as a mother, outside of this, being an expert in change management and in workplace leadership, what are some things that you have taken away from this that maybe have had an impact on how you parent, or even what you think about as it relates to your children? Like, I'm a mom too. I have a gang of kids, and I'm concerned about what's happening in the world as it relates to their future. So all these things that you're learning and experiencing and even advising your clients on, how are you then thinking about your own children and their future as it relates to some of these topics?
Yes. I mean, and one thing that I will say that I think is a little bit sinister is, like, if you look at like kind of the world of Silicon Valley, a lot of these leaders in Silicon Valley, they would send their children to schools where it's like zero tech, right? And so there's like a school system where like it's zero tech. You can't even wear a Mickey Mouse shirt there. Like, you have to go home and change. And so, and I think that's because they, of all people, know full well what this could do to your brain, to your attention span, anatomically, to your brain, to your ability to function in the world. So I'm definitely not perfect when it comes to this. Like, I try to limit my own social media. Like, my kids, I can tell them like, no iPhone, no, we're not doing this, no screen time. But if they see me doing it constantly, which, for work, I sometimes, I have to, unfortunately, then it's lost. That's completely lost on them, And so I think first and foremost, try to model the behavior that you want to see in your kids. And it's just like, it's like the secret to weight loss or something. It's not a secret. It's like you need to exercise, you need to eat healthy. I mean, we all know what we need to do, right? So I think it's being balanced with your approach to social media. And so with my kids, like we have a rule where it's really no screen. They don't really have any screen time. They've got like an hour on the weekend, but then I have to fill their time with other things, right? It's a lot more active parenting. Like it's really easy to just be like, here's an iPad, and I'll be honest, like I sometimes do that. Like if I'm on an airplane or a doctor's
same.
visit,
Yes.
yeah, doctor's visit or airplane, you can use the iPad as long as you want. I'm not going to question
Right.
you. So, but I try to limit it and I try to fill their life with, I want them, and this is going to sound corny, but I want them to have a love of learning. And so I try to make, books and learning about things and travel and meeting different types of people and different cultures interesting for them. Because I think if you can spark that intellectual curiosity in your children, then they're going to be fine. They're going to be fine. So.
And they'll discover on their own, and you're right. And I have young kids and I have older kids. And it's one of those things where when I look at the world and what's happening, and I think about all the social issues, even with my two older kids who are in college, my daughter is constantly sending me things that she's consuming. Yeah. And like, Mom, and she will ask me, is this for real?
Yeah.
Like, that's her first question. Like, is this real? Do you know if this is accurate? And so the onus is on me to be able to guide her through that. I appreciate that she questions it and doesn't just automatically agree or assume that it's correct, but it could be anything. I mean, a lot of times she'll send me a video about some person saying like, hey, this is how you can make $1 million in 6 months and you don't even have to invest any money. And they'll give you all the steps and, they'll have this great TikTok put together. Yeah. And so I'll watch it. And I'm like, well, Naya, it's kind of real, but here are the things they didn't say.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not that they're lying. It's just that there are a bunch of other things that you have to consider first. So I know for me, like a lot of these things that we're influencing our leaders and our clients to really work through, I'm having to take it back and say, okay, well, how do I do this with my kids? How do I help them through this? How do I make sure that they are looking at primary sources when it relates to the news and not just consuming what they see or listening to their friends? And then for my younger ones, how am I making sure to spark that curiosity so they automatically question and are curious about what's happening or what they're seeing and not just accepting things for face value?
Yeah, no, wonderful.
So, Sabat, we have had a great conversation. I'm looking at the time, but I do want to do a couple of things before we wrap up. So first of all, for those of you who have been joining us and who have been on, if you are still with us, just put in the chat that you're still here. I may not be able to see it in our platform in the background, but I would love to go back and see who is still with us, who is still hanging in there with us. And then, of course, if you have any questions for Sabat, please put it there. Or any questions for me, we'll be happy to come back and comment on questions as I see them afterwards. So I see a few people saying that they're still here, they're still hanging out. So I love and I appreciate all the people who are still with us on this Friday afternoon. So Sabat, the last question is, what would you say? Like, if you could just give, here are my final tips. If you didn't listen to anything else that I said, if you missed the first part, if you missed the middle part, if you went to get coffee and you missed this dialogue that we had, if you missed anything, these are the things that I want you to take away more than anything else.
Yeah. So I would say it's kind of two things, is that as a leader, and I know we're kind of geared towards leaders in this call, you have a responsibility and people look to you and they want to be seen. And so don't ignore people's lived experiences. Like we have to have enough empathy to recognize that people are struggling in the current environment. And I also want to say, just to anyone who's listening, I talked a lot about algorithms and manufactured things, but that's not to take away from people's lived experiences and legitimate, suffering that people are experiencing. Like I definitely don't want to take away from that. There's a lot of justice out there and people are rightly upset about that, So I think firstly, just for leaders to just, recognize that you have a responsibility. And then also recognizing that language matters, that representation matters. So when you I remember at a company actually that we worked with together, they did some kind of presentation, and there was like one little icon, little person with a headscarf on, and I felt great. I was like, oh, I'm part of this group. I mean, it's like this like elementary school thing inside of us all that we want to feel like we belong. And so just recognizing representation matters, acknowledging someone's suffering, whether you think it's legitimate or not, doesn't take anything away from you as a human being. Okay. It doesn't. Yeah. And so, we can acknowledge each other's pain without necessarily agreeing or disagreeing. And I would just say as human beings, we should extend that to each other, whether it's at work or anywhere else. So yeah, those would be my tips.
I love it, Savannah. I appreciate you talking about this, because I know, and as you can see, we got a lot of people who are saying, I'm still here, still with you, still hanging in there, still going strong. So thank you for those of you who are still with us. And thank you to those of you on the replay who are still with us. But I think, those things are really important. And it really comes back to what you originally said. Like, we all have a responsibility. Every human wants to be seen. We want to be heard. And we want to feel included wherever we are in our environment. We don't ever want to feel excluded. We don't want to feel unheard, and we don't want to feel unseen. And unfortunately, there are things happening in this world, in the US and abroad, that there are a lot of people who feel unheard and unseen. And they are unheard and unseen. And so I know for me, sometimes it's difficult because I want to be that voice for people who are unheard and unseen. But I also have to protect my own psychology around that, right? So we talked about how, recently, as most of you probably know, there was a Black woman who was shot in the face by police in her own home. And to this moment, I won't even try to look for the video because I can't watch it. It's too close to, it makes no sense. And then when I read about it and research it, I'm like, this is crazy. And it makes you want to do something, right? It makes you want to, like, okay, I have to speak up about this. But there's always this negotiation of, okay, do I really get emotionally invested in this to the point where then it's now impacting me? So kind of like how you said, like, hey, I had to turn off the news for a while because it was just too much. But then if I don't speak up, who will?
Yeah.
And I think that's always, we all have that dilemma, but I think we also have some really good tips and tools that you gave us in this session today on what to do to, one, not just protect ourselves, but also be able to advocate for people who feel unheard. And it doesn't have to be on this big global scale. It can be people within your own team. So that's what I want people who are on this call to think about. Like, a lot of times you think about, oh, I have to, speak up for this whole group. My dog's coming in here, don't know why. I have to speak up for this whole group of people who are, misunderstood and unheard. But then you could also speak up for that person who's on your team.
Yeah.
Maybe is always quiet in meetings, who maybe they're new to the organization. Maybe they're different in some way. There is a way for all of us to advocate for each other. And if we do it on those micro scales, we will start to see the culture that we live in change in our realm of influence. And then it's my hope that we start to see that reverberate throughout our city, our nation, and even the world at large.
I love that, Janae. I think that's beautiful. And I just want to thank you for normalizing standing up for people and speaking out. I have tremendous respect for you and for the work that you do. And I just want to say also that in the kind of the world that we live in, I think people appreciate authenticity. In this like fake world of AI and deep fakes, when someone has an authentic voice, I think that's appreciated by just your average person, but also by clients and customers. Yeah. And so I think you'll benefit from that.
It's very true. And I think I've had people come up to me in public that are like my friends in my head, or I know them on LinkedIn, but I've never met them in person. And they'll be like, oh, Janae, remember when you said? And I'm like, nope, don't remember. I was just on a rant that day. But it matters. I'm always so shocked how much it matters.
It matters.
And how you talked about just the power of words and how we can use words to either build people up or tear people down. And we all have a personal decision to make in that.
Right.
I think there's one comment that I want to call out because it's very detailed before we wrap up. So this person said leaders respond to things that impact the bottom line. To understand the impact of various topics on company perception and profits, we can explore how public perception shapes brand reputation, influences customer behavior, and ultimately affects financial outcomes. Additionally, CSR plays a significant role in consumer and investor decisions. Oh, they're bringing it. I can't even see whose name this is, but I love this comment, which can lead to increased sales and investment. Understanding customer perception is crucial, and as it directly correlates, I can't even see the rest of the comment, but I thank you for whoever mentioned this, and I also will comment and respond to that. But I think we do see a lot of in our companies, they talk about CSR, and this is really a big part of it, right? All these topics that we're talking about, it's not just because we want people to be good leaders. We do. It's not just because we want people to be good people. We do. But also, when you have good leaders and good people working at good companies, you have highly profitable companies. And the data and the statistics around that is, beyond anything that you and I could convince people of.
100%.
So I love that someone introduced this, because that is a big part of it. Like, yes, when you have an engaged workforce and when people feel like they belong, your company is more profitable.
If you want to be a legendary brand, you just look at the legendary brands out there. They're held to a different standard,
They are.
It's a decision.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, that was Brian Scott. Okay, thank you. I actually know who that is, so I will follow up with him for sure. Thank you for letting me know who said that. So for everyone who is still with us, thank you for being here this afternoon. Thank you for your engagement. Thank you for your commentary. Thank you for your questions. And we'll be sure to look at the live chat and go in and respond if you had questions. I encourage you, yes, this is how you reach us at ctmunlimited.com. But I also would love for Sabat to share what are you up to and how can people get in contact with you?
Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely share my my contact information, but we're driving, our approach to change across our clients. Always looking for people to collaborate with on that. So would love to talk more about that with anyone who's interested, and I'll share my contact info with you guys so that we can stay in touch.
Okay, very good. And yes, please go check out their website, Perfectus Consulting, perfectus-consulting.com. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
So please go to the website, connect with Sabat on LinkedIn. Yes. You can follow Perfectus on LinkedIn as well. And I'm just excited to continue this now of work. Just as a preview, y'all, next time we're going to talk about the erasure of equity in DEI and how the world seems to have lost their minds. But also, I kind of said that this was going to happen in 2020. I'm not saying I know everything, but I kind of said I'm also like, I told you so. So a lot of companies are, walking back. They're removing the E from DEI. It's just, let's focus on inclusion. Let's focus on diversity, but we don't want to talk about equity. But equity is about sustainability. Anyway, I'm not going to go on a rant, I promise. My team is like, Janae, wrap it up. We're done. But that is our next topic. So I hope you will join us for our next installment for the next. And Sabat, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.